Hello, guys. Welcome to yet another episode of the Breath of Hope podcast. My name is Victor Akan, and I would be walking you through the remaining minutes of this video. Very quickly today, we'll be talking about men treating their wives better. I'm going to start with this question. Have you ever asked a person, why do you have this bad habit, or why are you doing this? And the person would typically respond with, that's how I was brought up, or that's how I've always been, or that's how my father was, or something like that. A lot of times they are just responding to you, but it's also revealing something about us human beings. A lot of how we think has a framework, and that framework stems from our background. And so you would realize that when you're brought up as a child, you have that's when you are at your least vulnerable. I mean, you can tell the child anything and the child just believes. You can tell him that aliens are falling from the sky and he believes automatically, right? And so that's when you're very vulnerable, and that's when it's easier or easiest to frame your mindset, to frame your approach to life, right? And so it's very important that the family structure, the family unit is in such an environment whereby it is conducive to frame children well enough, to become better people, to become better models, right? And one thing to understand is that human beings are social beings, and the implication of that statement is that, after our need to survive, to live, once we've achieved that need, we then begin to look for things such as love, things such as a sense of identity, and things like that. And our environments will determine the information that our mind is being fed to, that our mind is being fed, to have that firm idea of what love should be, right? Of what identity should be. And then in this use case, the love or the way our parents express love towards themselves matters a lot. And the reason why I took this episode to major on the men is because the men are typically the head of the home, the men are typically the leaders of the family. And so every activity that begins must first be initiated from the head, very importantly. And some of the ways that men should love is that besides the basic needs that women should have, back then in the ancient days, you had just survival. Nobody cared about mental health back then. You had just one need, just survive. And so women would typically want men who were typically stronger, who were warriors, who could provide for their needs, or who had the riches to make them feel safe, right? Nobody cared about mental health, nobody cared about you crying. You just had to be strong to survive. But as civilization came in play, we began to realize that, okay, we had other needs. We wanted to feel love, wanted to have a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, all of those things, right? All of these things played out in a more magnified manner, right? And that was because we now live in a relatively saner society. And so the responsibilities of men has evolved over time. So besides the important needs, like men should be providers, men should be protectors, men should now be able to spend more time with their families. Why? Because on one hand, it fills up the emotional needs that his woman has. So for instance, your woman loves having quality time, she loves a couple of other things. You have to be able to interpret these needs. You have to be emotionally intelligent. That wasn't required back then, but these needs have evolved, or the demand for these needs has evolved. And so you must be able to meet these needs as a man, right? Because right now it just feels like provision and protection is more or less the bare minimum, if for lack of a better word, right? And so men would have to step up. Daughters will need their father's presence to teach them what love is, to make them feel more confident. Back then, nobody really cared if you were confident or you felt beautiful enough. But right now, daughters need to feel more confident. They need to feel beautiful. They need to feel valued. Sons need to be taught how to be men. And so they need their father's presence to show them how. They don't just need their father's money or, all of those financial benefits. They need their father's presence also to be taught how to be men, to be taught how to, treat women right, to be taught how to, exercise self-control and all of those stuff. And so there is a growing need for men to step up into these roles. And the reason why I'm emphasizing on this is because a lot of times men, would just think that they need to be providers, they need to, get the bag so much that they are able to put their family in that safe place whereby they are protected and whereby they are well fed, their needs are being met, school fees and all of those stuff. But men must also realize that they need to step into, bigger roles. And that being said, we understand the consequences of girls who grew up with absent fathers, or girls who grew up with dysfunctional dads, or girls who grew up with fathers who are not very present. And we understand one of the major, effects that you see play out in these girls is a need for validation in the, with other men as they get older. So because their fathers didn't spend time with them, they need to feel valued, they need to feel loved, and so they might end up jumping from men to men, or from relationship to relationship, or they might even just end up being praised for other men to pounce on, very, very easily. Why? Because that need for you are worth it, you are enough, wasn't given to them at the very foundational level, right? And I would like to measure on some very important extremes, right? And that's the fact that, besides the fact that men must be intentional, besides the fact that men must be able to interpret the emotional needs that their family has, that their wives has, that their children has, men must be careful not to jump into some very important extremes. And number one is domestic violence, right? And number two would be emotional abuse. Now, emotional abuse, I mean cheating and all of those stuff, right? And it's very important because you have to understand is your children are watching, right? And while sometimes women might try to shield them long enough, children can sense the tension, children are like thermostats in a way. They're able to detect the temperature of the environment, in the sense that they're able to dictate the environment. Is it filled with love? Is it filled with tension? Is it filled with hate? And so that can help them become more healthy individuals or not. Quick examples. I know this man that would always fight with his wife, and sometimes he would beat her, right? And he has a daughter who is now my friend, right? And she has this thing whereby when you're trying to correct her, she gets usually very defensive. Why? Because it reminds her of how her father used to shout at her mom, or how her father would sometimes abuse her mom, right? And so she gets very defensive when you're trying to point out corrections, right? And of course she realizes that she's working towards it, right? But the point is that in the man's mind, he felt like why I'm doing this is justified, but it still had negative side effects on his children. Another example is a man who always had issues with his wife. He wasn't intentional enough to work on those issues. Why? Because of pride and ego, right? And probably the fault might have been on both parties, right? But the focus is on the man now. And so now this lady doesn't even have interest in settling down, doesn't have interest in love. I mean, she can fall in love, but the idea of committing long term scares her. And so she will just sabotage any relationship that she comes into. Why? Because what was supposed to inform her that love, marriage should be a beautiful union, has now scarred her. In her mind, subconsciously, if my parents didn't work out, when I look at my parents, what I see is a picture of how something beautiful can turn very sour and bitter. And so I am scared of that repeat in my life. So rather than risk it, I rather just play it safe and not commit long term to any relationship. And so in your mind, you're doing certain things because you think that those things are necessary as a man, but it has negative effects on your children. And guess what? It also has negative effects on you. So a lot of times you have the man, let's say the man cheats, the man abuses his wife, he does all of those things, those neglects, and all of those stuff. Now, the man has decided to jap her with his wife. And let's say that the woman is a nurse, right? Or let's say she's in a position where she's able to earn more. And then you're moving to a country whereby the woman has more power. This woman remembers how you made her life a living hell, how you insulted her, verbally, abused her physically, cheated on her. And you're going to a country where she's not the one in power, where she's not the one where she can mess your life up, where she probably even earns more. And then the woman is dealing with you and you're complaining, but you made her life a living hell, right? And this is something that you must understand about women. Women, a lot of times, can be more vengeful than men. So a woman can decide to play the fool until she has the upper hand, but you might never know till she has the upper hand, right? I know of this story where this man was a commissioner of police, and I mean, this was when I was still a kid in primary school, right? But the man was the commissioner of police, and the woman, of course, was a housewife. And so sometimes this man will bring side chicks into the house, and they had this BQ. And while the woman was in the main house, he will bring side chicks to the boys' quarters, openly disrespecting the woman. And then time went on, the man retired, from the police force. And the woman then got into politics, became some sort of commissioner or something, right? And so the woman had more financial leverage. She had, a lot of dominance over the man. The woman made the man's life a living hell. And guess what? The man caught diabetes, right? The man caught diabetes. And after he caught diabetes, they had to amputate his legs, I think 1 or 2 legs, right? And after they did that, the man was literally a vegetable at the mercy of the woman, and the woman dealt with him mercilessly, right? And so we would also realize that when men are good to women, when men are really good to women, even on their deathbed, even on their sick bed, now if you have a good woman, even on their sick beds, the woman take care of them till the end. And that's because women by nature would always operate based off how you've treated them in the past. So they use your past treatment of them to judge how they should treat you when you need them, right? And of course, this doesn't apply in every situation, but generally speaking, women use your past treatment of them on, to determine how they should treat you in the future. And so when a man is good, the man is, terminally ill. Men, are more likely to fall terminally ill, by the way. When the man is terminally ill, the way your wife would treat you would, determine, the way your wife would treat you would depend on how you treated her in the past. And so this is a call for men to, do better, be consistent in, being a provider and being a protector. I think that's the bare minimum. But also be emotionally involved and present in the life of your wife and your kids, right? Don't cheat. And if you fall, don't make it a habit. Find ways to become better. Never lay your hands on your wife. Do your best to never do that, right? Do not be emotionally abusive towards your wife. Build her up, build her up constantly. I like to end with this, Ephesians chapter 5, I think 23, if I'm not mistaken, where it talks about, the husband loving the wife as Christ loved the church and gave his life for, her. And what that, is simply a picture of is the fact that Christ loved us so much that he gave his life for us, right? That simply means that a man must love his wife, value her so much that he lives his entire life in view of, his wife, in view of his family. It means that the things you can't do to your own body, you should not be able to do to your wife. Why? Because you love your wife so much that you can lay down your own life for your wife. And of course, if you can die, if you love somebody so much that you're willing to die for the person, it should also reflect in how you live for that person. The fact that you can die for a person should reflect in how you live for them. And so ask yourself this whenever you want to make decisions. If I can die for my wife, right, and I'm supposed to live for her, would I do this differently? Should I do this differently? It's very important, because the key to a happy life as a man, the key to a fulfilled life as a man is highly dependent on how you treat your wife. Considering the fact that, you will most likely need her someday. She will most likely be in a position whereby she is more dominant than you. How she treats you will depend on how you've treated her in the past, right? And I hope that this helps somebody. I hope that this makes somebody's marriage better, stronger, right? But that's all I got for you right now. Stay tuned to a new episode next week. Thank you. Bye.